So, in the spirit of environment, I want to ask you, how many of you think that your environment shapes you? Okay, now keep your hand up. Keep your hand up. How many of you feel like your environment controls you? Oh, all the hands went down. See, the thing is, we don't like the idea of our environment shaping or controlling us when we don't have say in it. We like to believe that we choose how we speak, how we dress, how we act, but science and lay observation have told us there might be another way. I was planning on wearing my Hawaiian shirt today. It's very hideous, but I couldn't find it. So I just want to tell you about this. I wore this Hawaiian shirt most Fridays. Where, might you ask? Not Hawaii, not Mexico, not the Bahamas, but Lincoln, Nebraska. Yes, it is true. Among many other fashion trends, such as White Pant Wednesday or Birkenstocks, or as J-Fit likes to do, Birkin socks, we had many different traditions of what we would wear at Union. And this tradition was called Aloha Friday. So this caught on pretty quickly, and week after week you would see more and more students participating in this Aloha spirit. You may think this is some silly collegiate trend, but we all fall victim of our fashion being influenced by our environment. Today, since I couldn't find my Hawaiian shirt, I decided I would claim my new home, Boulder, in my fashion trend. How many of you guys own a flannel? If you didn't raise your hand, you're a liar. And if you don't have one, ask Pastor Elia. He has plenty he's willing to share. The thing is, we like to think we have control over what we wear, over what we say, over what we do, but unfortunately our environment has some influence on that. Environment can be defined as the social and cultural forces that shape the life of a person or population. We like the idea of our environment shaping us in positive ways, such as the way church shapes us in a positive way. We like knowing that coming to church every Saturday to partake in Sabbath, rest, and worship together, Bible study, shapes us in a positive way. It's a reminder of who we are, but more importantly, who God is. It gives us time to be around friends, family, to worship, pray, sing with one another. It gives us the space to breathe. We like the positive way school shapes us. It teaches us to think, to grow, to ask questions, to learn. We like the positive ways our family shapes us. We get to communicate and celebrate with one another, go on trips, eat meals together, and create memories together. We like the idea of environment shaping us in positive ways, ways that we can control. But what we struggle with is the idea of our environment shaping us outside of our control, sometimes without our knowledge. Like when you come to church and you can't seem to shake the baggage of the week, or you're in Bible study with that one person that you just really disagree with, or we sing that one song that you just can't stand, or you're around someone that you have hard feelings with. Or school, maybe when a teacher that you have you don't see eye to eye with, or when you get a bad grade, or you just don't understand the lecture whatsoever. Or family. Do I need to explain how family can sometimes create a bad environment, or we can all understand that one a little bit? Scientists and psychologists have done many tests that have added to this hypothesis that our environment shapes who we are and how we act, think, and feel. I'll give you a few examples of some articles that were published. Where we are shapes who we are. How your surroundings affect the way we think, feel. And this one may sound familiar. You're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. If that one doesn't scare you, I don't know what will. Some of the tests concluded by scientists and psychologists include the way street lamps affect our environment. Studies show that when street lights are lit up blue, crime rates go down. Another study observed that the brain waves in monkeys. So if a monkey was eating a banana and a monkey was watching on a television another monkey eating a banana, the same parts of their brain would light up. The list of experiments goes on, showing us that our surroundings and what we hear and see and experience affect us. In my short life, I have noticed that there are 3 spheres of environmental influence that we should be aware of. Throughout the book of Esther, we're going to discover these, and I want you to look at these three and see how they shape these characters that we're going to meet. My hope is that through this story, you don't only recognize how these spheres of environment shape Esther and the other characters, but that you look introspectively at your life and see how your environment is shaping you. So for the next 3 weeks, we're going to be talking about environment on 3 different levels. The first is peripheral, then proximal, and then personal. I'll have a diagram up on the screen so you can see it a little bit better for all the visual learners. And so I'm also going to use another example, chocolate. Ellie already sold me out. She knew that this was coming. So this is my favorite chocolate in the world, this little golden ball of delicious chocolate, a Ferrero Rocher. So we're going to use this and also the circles on the screen as an example of the different environments. Today we'll be talking about environment on the peripheral scale most. This is the largest sphere, and most that happens in this sphere is kind of out of your control. So this will include things like the country you grew up in, the state, city, your religion, your culture, things that are a little bit more broad and generalized. So this is going to represent the outer layer of the chocolate. How many of you guys have had a Ferrero Rocher? Oh, good. So this outer layer is this crunchy shell with some hazelnut and whatnot in it. Then we're going to look at the proximal, okay? The proximal is the creamy center of the chocolate. And this is going to be things in your life that are a little bit more in your control. These are things such as your family life, your friendships, your job life, and things like that. These are your everyday encounters, the groups of people you choose to spend time with on a regular basis, the places you choose to go, the hobbies and extracurriculars you enjoy. You can tell the direct impact these things have on your life. Have you ever noticed that you use the same phrases or hand gestures as the people around you? That's your proximal environment at work. But the last and most important piece of this chocolate is what? The hazelnut. The hazelnut is the best part, and that is going to represent your personal environment, the innermost circle. This is the environment and the place where you connect with God. This is the environment that shapes and holds your innermost character and values. I challenge you to think through these environments as we go along in the story of Esther, and I believe strongly that you're going to notice the importance of the personal environment against all odds, whether it's peripheral or proximal. The first and largest sphere, the peripheral, is what we'll be talking about when we go through the first 4 chapters of Esther. Your peripheral environment, like I said, contains aspects outside of your control. This is maybe where you grew up, how you were raised, the city you live in. It might even be the color of your state. Even the climate of a place you live affects and shapes you. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. For those of you who have not spent a great deal in the great PNW, it wouldn't make sense to you that out of the 300 glorious days of sunshine we get here in Colorado, I'm wishing about 200 of those were a little rainy. You see, I find it quite annoying. Days when it's not the perfect shade of overcast is just a little irritating. But when that little drizzle comes down and the skies are gray, that's where I find my happy place. A few days without your guys' precious sunshine, and you'd be pretty sad, right? Those are the days when I'm the happiest. For me, the dreary overcast makes my heart warm and fuzzy inside. That's my peripheral environment coming out. Other peripheral aspects that have affected me include growing up in California and Washington on the West Coast, living in a bilingual home where, strangely enough, I only speak English, and going to Christian schools, being an only child, having my parents separate in my early teenage years. All of these things add to the environment that shaped me. It forms a large part of my identity that just seems normal, or at least it seems normal until you're put into a different environment. I remember the culture shock when I went to Lincoln, Nebraska for the first time. No one understood my sarcasm. Strangers said hi everywhere I went, and I couldn't go a day without only hearing English. And eventually, over 4 years, as much as I hate to admit it, the Midwest got the best of me. I began saying hello to random strangers when I would see them. My sarcasm needed sharpening anytime I was around a witty West Coaster. And strangely enough, English was still the only language I could speak. We all experience the influence environment has on us. Many times, it's directly outside of our control. Your peripheral environment shapes much of who you are with little of your say. Through the lens of the book of Esther, we are able to see how environment shapes us. In the next few weeks, we're going to unravel how the characters in Esther were shaped or not shaped by their peripheral, proximal, or personal environments, and how we today still struggle with this. Let's take a look at the first 4 chapters of Esther together. If you want to follow, that will be page 451 in your pew Bibles. Feel free, underline, highlight, mark it up, write some notes in it, take it home with you, leave it here. Those Bibles are yours. So page 451 is where we'll start in Esther. So right at the beginning, we jump into the environment of the Medo-Persian Empire. The text opens with, "In the days of Ahasuerus, who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces." Ahasuerus, or Xerxes for history's sake and also pronunciation's sake, sits on his throne in the capital city of Susa. In the 3rd year of his reign, he has a banquet, a 180-day-long banquet to be exact. This is some party. He shows off all his riches and goods to everyone. And after 180 days of partying, he's just not quite done yet. He decides, let's throw 7 more days of a banquet. So for this 7-day banquet, he invites everyone in Susa, from the lowliest to the highest, from the richest to the poorest. The author goes into great detail explaining the decorations, the drink and food at this party. The king gives orders that when it comes to drinking, everyone should do what they want. Drink a little, don't drink, or follow his lead and drink a lot. During this 7-day banquet, we are introduced to his queen, Vashti, who also threw a banquet for all the women in the palace. We are told that on the 7th day, the day that the Jews, and we understand to be the Sabbath, the day of rest, causes restlessness in the kingdom. On this day, the king orders 7 of his eunuchs to fetch Queen Vashti so that he can parade her among all the other beautiful things he's showing off. Parade her off to all the drunk men of Susa. Somehow, this didn't sound like a really fun evening for Vashti, and she refused. Today we think, yeah, you go, girl. But the implications were much different for her than they would be for most women in North America today. What's interesting about Vashti is in the text, she's described as beautiful and fair to look at. This is in verse 11. The original Hebrew word here to describe her is actually the same word that God used when he said, "It is good" during creation. Vashti was not just beautiful, she was good. That goodness found in her was not having this idea of being shown off as an object. Vashti lived in an environment of power, and she had none of it. She refused to be taken advantage of based off her peripheral environment. She said no, and she had consequences. If you look in your worship guides, you'll find a list of questions. So right now, the first question I want to ask you is, what are you willing to stand up and say no to? Maybe it's in your personal life, or in your school or work life. Maybe it's in your state or in your country. When I ask this question, I'm not saying, what do you think you want to stand up for? What would you post about on Facebook or like on Facebook? I'm asking you, what is something you're willing to risk consequences for? Just as easily as she was banished, Vashti could have been killed. What is it in your life that you are truly willing to suffer for? What is Jesus calling you to stand for regardless of the outcome? Vashti's outcome was the wrath of the king. The king gets extremely angry, and you almost can't blame him for it. He has just been humiliated in front of all of Susa, from the least to the greatest, at this banquet. The king is in the most awkward situation where a woman has taken power out from underneath him. And besides the king's wounded ego, we also notice all the other men at this banquet shift uneasily. If the king of 127 provinces, is told no by his wife, what's to stop them from experiencing a feminist revolution? Quickly and drunkenly, the men act. They knew if this situation wasn't left unhandled, there would be tons of contempt and anger in all of the land. In verse 19, if you're following along, we're given a solution. If it pleases the king, let a royal edict be issued to him, to let it know that it's written by the laws of Persia and Media, so that it cannot be repealed, that Vashti should no longer come in the presence of king, and let the king give her royal position to another who is more worthy than she. And then the king's edict, which he shall make, is heard throughout all the kingdom, great as it is, and all the women will give honor to their husbands, great and small. The king jumps on board with this idea, and letters are sent out in every language to every province in this kingdom. Xerxes has only been in power 3 years and is leaning heavily on the advice of anyone who's willing to give it to him. Commentators have often pointed out that Xerxes is labeled as a buffoon, often found in Greek comedies. Carol Betchel expands on this, saying, Ahasuerus may not mean to do wicked and destructive things, but he does them nevertheless. That is what sets him apart from Haman later on in the story. In short, Ahasuerus may be a buffoon, but he's a dangerous buffoon. He seems largely out of touch with reality, and this is a characteristic that will surface again and again in further chapters. Almost right away, the king is taking advice again. As we enter chapter 2, we find that his anger has gone away, but it's replaced with loneliness. But who better than his servants to suggest another solution? Their suggestion to the king this time: let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint overseers in all provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather every beautiful young virgin to Susa, the capital, to the harem, in the custody of Haggai, and the king's eunuch who is in charge of the home, and let cosmetics be given to them. Then let the young lady who pleases the king the most be queen. The king seemed to like the idea of choosing from countless young, beautiful virgins, and so with no twisting of his arm, he agrees. This is where we are introduced to 2 key characters in the text. Now, there was a Jew in Susa whose name was Mordecai, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite who has been taken into exile from Jerusalem with the captives who have been exiled with Jehoiakim, king of Judah, whom King Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, exiled. Here we are given a pretty extensive peripheral view and the environment of which Mordecai grew up. He is a Jew living in a Gentile world, having grown up hearing stories of exile and exchanges of power. He is no longer a slave, but he's also no longer living in freedom in an environment where his people rule. The story goes on. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is, Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. Now this young lady was beautiful from face, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. Both Mordecai and Esther are Persian names. We're given only one reference to Esther's Jewish name, Hadassah. Growing up under Persian rule, we see these 2 Jews being shaped by their environment. As we continue on with the story, Esther gathered with many other young, beautiful women to Susa under the care of Haggai. Esther found favor among him and was taken care of in all aspects. Before any of the women were able to see the king, they had to undergo a year of beautification. I don't know about you, but that seems a bit excessive. I've known girls who have taken maybe about an hour to do their makeup and an hour to do their hair, and even that seems a little over the top. But here, 12 months these women are getting beautified. On the outside, these women were ready to see the king. The process was quite simple. In the evening, she would go in, and in the morning, she would return. She'd go to a second harem, and this would be in charge of the guy in charge of the concubines, and she would not go in again unless the king summoned her by name. During this time, Esther took the advice given to her by her cousin and didn't let anyone know she was a Jew. During her time under Haggai's care and further on into the story, Esther concealed her true identity. To me, this begs the question of how shaped Esther was by her peripheral environment. There was no indication of her Jewish heritage to be seen. So for all intensive purposes, Esther looked and behaved like a Gentile. The Smith and Helway's Bible commentary expands on this thought, saying, for Esther, maintaining her Jewish identity was not compromised because she was forced to break Jewish laws. Her task was to influence her own survival and the survival of the rest of the Jews. Whether God was involved or not, Esther and Mordecai acted to preserve their people. As a Jew, Mordecai would never bow down to Haman. Esther would enter Ahasuerus' harem and be compromised to a Gentile, even becoming his queen. Circumstances may push Jewish self-definition to new limits, calling for innovation and compromise. But those actions do not negate the certainty of affirming one's identity as a Jew. That's a heavy statement to take in, yeah? By in-depth study of Esther, my sweet Esther, my sweet hero from the Bible, that idea has kind of had to been shaken and tested. Fortunately, the ways of Xerxes are done away with today, right? Our peripheral environment would never buy into this idea of a guy dating multiple women at once, right? Right? Okay. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but I'm wondering if some of you have maybe heard or seen the show called The Bachelor. Oh, okay. From the laughter, I think we have. So The Bachelor is this show where either one guy or one girl dates multiple girls or multiple guys, and then after dating them for about a few months, they get to choose one at the end. Sounds great, right? Now, the difference is the women in this show actually sign themselves up versus Esther, who really had no choice. But I can't help but wonder how we would feel about a Christian being on this show, or how we would feel about someone from our tribe of Christianity, a Seventh-day Adventist, being on this show. How are you feeling about Esther right about now? Yeah? Esther was on The Bachelor. She didn't tell anyone of her religion or culture, and it definitely didn't show. And she won. Esther found favor with the king and filled the void Vashti left when Vashti claimed her own identity. When Esther is crowned queen, another banquet is thrown. So if you're going to notice, there's going to be a lot of feasting, a lot of eating, a lot of banquets, a lot of drinking throughout the book of Esther. This is kind of the peripheral environment of this kingdom: eating, drinking, partying. In the end of chapter 2, we are told that Mordecai is sitting at the king's gate. So now we have two Jews who are involved in Gentile power and politics. I want you to take a moment to think of Esther and Mordecai, who seem to have fallen susceptible to their Gentile environment. You see, we like the outcome of the story of Esther, but we don't like the methods of getting there. Think on this for a bit. Were Esther and Mordecai compromising their values to God or their values to their Jewish environment? Hear me out. I believe all three of our environments, peripheral, proximal, and personal, should be consistent. Kind of like the Ferrero Rocher, right? There's the hazelnut in the center, there's hazelnut and the creamy chocolate in the middle, and there's hazelnut on the outside. But in the case of Esther's story, we're not really seeing the hazelnut on the outside right now. We turn a blind eye towards Esther and Mordecai because the outcome is what we want. But that's exactly it. We're able to see their story in 2020 hindsight vision. I wonder if sometimes we look straight to the outermost level of a person, their peripheral level, and focus so intensely on that. As we continue through the story of Esther, we're given insight into her innermost level, and you can see her character and intentions. She is a hero. She is many girls' favorite Bible character. This brings us to our second question in the worship guide. How do you cope with people who do not fit the peripheral environment you think they should? How are you coping with Esther at this point in the story? Because where we stand right now in chapter 2, all she's done is changed her name, spent a year being beautified, slept with the king, and is now a Gentile queen. How can a good Christian condone that? The only way we can is because we see the end result. The journey is laid out to us in 10 perfect chapters, but the people we meet every day aren't always exposed to us in pen and paper. We are able to see them within the context of their two outer circles, but not the inner circle. The inner circle is for those who see past the surface levels. The inner circle is for those who understand there is more to just a person than what they see. Yes, the outside is normally a good reflection of the inside, but what about the Esthers? To paraphrase a wonderful movie quote, people are like a box of chocolates. You never know which one you're going to get. And much like a Ferrero Rocher chocolate, if you haven't had one before, you have no idea that there's an entire hazelnut waiting for you on the inside. You have to get past the first two layers to figure it out. The next two chapters cause us to break through those layers rather rapidly. While serving at the gate, Mordecai hears of a plot to assassinate the king. He relays this information to Esther, and Esther informs the king in Mordecai's name. This gets written down in the book of Chronicles kept by the kingdom. Chapter 3 begins with, after these events, the king promoted, and you think it should be Mordecai, right? He just saved the king's life. But no, the king promoted Haman. And we are introduced to yet another character of the story. Haman is promoted and identified as an Agagite. This thickens the plot. Remember earlier when we were given Mordecai's introduction and we were told that he was a Benjamite? And we're like, that's cool information. Well, now we're seeing a tangible historical tension between these two. When you go back a few books in the Bible to 1 Samuel chapter 15, you will remember why this term might sound familiar. Agag was the king of the Amalekites, who King Saul was ordered to wipe out completely. But instead, he captures the king alive. Saul was a Benjamite. Mordecai is a Benjamite. Agag, a king meant to be destroyed hundreds of years ago. Haman, a bitter descendant. The disobedience of Saul has a ripple effect that has finally reached into the lives of Mordecai and Esther. We could play the what-if game all day, but it seems pretty clear that if Saul did what he was supposed to do, we wouldn't be about to face this enormous problem that is about to come up in Esther's story. If Saul had obeyed the first time, we could go down the list of Bible characters and say, if they had only obeyed the first time until our minds grow tired. We serve a God of grace and power, one who is able to work through the messes we create or the messes we ignore. But we also serve a God who speaks to us, who gives us power and courage and wisdom. If you look to the third question in your worship guide, I'm going to ask you another question. What are you doing to forgive yourselves for the times when you didn't do it right the first time? And what are you doing to follow God now? Saul didn't do what he was called to do, so Esther now does what she needs to do. Very quickly, Esther is forced to let her personal environment take the front seat. Haman is promoted, and Mordecai refuses to bow down to him or pay any respect. When the reasoning for this surfaces that Mordecai will not bow down on the account that he is a Jew, Haman is filled with rage. The text tells us, he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him who the people of Mordecai were. Therefore, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews whose people were Mordecai, who he wanted to destroy throughout the entire kingdom. Haman goes to the king with a proposal, and if we've learned anything about this king, it's that he's pretty quick to take the advice of anyone who will give it to him. Haman comes to the king and says, there's a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the land. Their laws are different from all of us other people, and they don't observe the king's laws. So it is not in the king's interest to let them remain. If it is pleasing to the king, let it be decreed that they may be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who carry out the king's business and put it into the king's treasuries. The king says, keep your silver, take my ring, make any irrevocable law that you want. This guy's sounding really smart, huh? What a great king. The decree to wipe out the Jews has been made. It's written in every language, and it's delivered to all the people of the kingdom. As the city falls into a state of confusion, the king and Haman sit down for a drink. News travels fast that this law was made, and it quickly is made known to Mordecai. When he hears of this, he tears his clothes, puts on sackcloth and ashes, and mourns publicly. The mourning and wailing grow louder as Jew after Jew finds out their fate. When Esther is told, the text tells us, she withers in great anguish. She sends Mordecai new clothes, but he will not accept them. Esther then sends one of the eunuchs to find Mordecai so she can better understand what's happening. The eunuch returns with information and instruction. Mordecai is asking Esther to plead to the king on behalf of the Jews. This is her reply to Mordecai. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king in the inner court without being summoned will be put to death unless the king holds out his golden scepter that he may live. And I have not been summoned to the king for the past 30 days. Mordecai does not let Esther fall apart now. He's not going to take her peripheral and her proximal excuses. Mordecai now appeals to her character, to her personal environment. He says, "Do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the rest of the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this." For such a time as this. Maybe all the junk Esther went through in her life and the compromises she had to make to her Jewish identity and the environment she had to be a part of wasn't all for nothing. Maybe it was for such a time as this. Mordecai appeals to who he knows Esther to be, and she responds accordingly. This is her reply. "Go, assemble all the Jews found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will also do in the same way. And thus I will go to the king, which is not according to the law." Esther's personal environment is starting to take over, cutting through the peripheral and proximal. She instructs fasting in a land of feasting. She brings her Jewish culture into her inner circle of maidens, and she will not let any man-made law stop her now. She concludes with, "And if I perish, I perish." These words are only a diluted echo of a Savior to come, one who knows he will perish, but takes the step forward anyway. Esther provided deliverance for the Jews, but today we are reminded of a Jesus who is deliverance. In Philippians chapter 1, we are told, "Yes, and I will rejoice, for I know that through your prayers and the help of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, this will turn out for my deliverance, as it is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be ashamed, but that with full courage, now and as always, Christ will be honored in my body, whether by life or by death. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain." The first question I asked you this morning was, what are you willing to stand up and say no to? But now I want to ask you, what are you willing to perish for? You see, Esther was reluctant at first. Have you ever felt reluctant when God asks you to do something? She felt trapped by the laws of her present environment. Have you ever felt trapped by your present environment? But Mordecai spoke to her heart. Jesus speaks to our hearts. And when he appeals to our innermost circle, to our personal environment, how do we respond? Are you truly willing to perish for Jesus despite the environment that surrounds you? Let's pray. Jesus, we're in a wonderful place here. We're in a place where we can love and worship you. But Jesus, not all our environments feel this safe. Jesus, when we walk out of these doors, we face obstacles, we face cultures, we face religions, we face people, we face ourselves that throw obstacles in our way of getting to that personal environment with you. Jesus, it's my prayer today that you appeal to my innermost circle, that you remind me that that is something that is supposed to cut through the other environments, that no man-made law, no person, no thing can stand in the way of what you call me to do. Jesus, it's my prayer today that you do the same for everyone else, that we are reminded that it is your power within us, that you appeal to our hearts. You call us to do these. And Jesus, I pray that we open up our hearts to you, that we don't let the proximal or the peripheral be a shield, that we don't let the proximal or the peripheral be an excuse to not do what you call us to do. Jesus, we answer yes to where you call us, and if we perish, we perish. In your name, amen.